balconies. That is what has occurred. We will now resume debate. Mr. President, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Senator Kauth, you're recognized to continue on your time.
Do you know how much I have left?
1 minute. 1 minute.
Thank you. So that is actually a very, very good representation of what all the hateful rhetoric has done. It's created this kind of an atmosphere where we no longer discuss and debate, where people throw things down from balconies and scream at us while we're trying to do our jobs. This bill is about protecting children. That is it. It's titled Let Them Grow. Let them grow to be adults, and they can make whatever decisions it is that they want, and we will support and encourage and love them. There's no hate on this side of the...
That's your time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Excuse me, you have 17 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate it. I didn't hear you very well because of the yelling outside. Thank you very much to the State Patrol for your efforts in keeping us safe today. I appreciate it
That's
very
your time,
much.
Senator. Thank you. Senator Mosier, you're recognized to speak.
I think sometimes how we conduct ourselves inside this legislative chamber is infectious, and it causes other people to act out. I think we need to treat each other with respect, regardless of where we come from, how much money we have, what we believe in. We should talk to each other. We should answer each other's questions. I think we should work together. Now, back to the bill at hand. The abortion part of the bill is not a ban. It changes the date from 20 weeks to 12. And already 90% of the abortions that occur in Nebraska are before 12 weeks. That's from the DHHS website. You can check on it if you want. It's a public website. Anybody can look at it. Back to the gender part of the bill. There's such a influx of young people concerned about their gender, what gender they were biologically determined to have, and then what they would really rather be. And my reason for being interested in supporting the bill is that I feel like parents are vulnerable when their kids aren't happy, and they want to do something to address that. And the parents want their kids to be happy, and so they search out, they're looking for something that could help. But when I was researching what they do to address this angst of not being the gender that they'd rather be, I looked at the Mayo Clinic website, and they've got a good website that talks a lot about the issues, and it talks a little bit about both sides. But one thing I wanted to talk about or some of the things I wanted to talk about are the negative effects of taking puberty blockers. They can affect your growth. They can affect your bone growth and density. They can affect your future fertility. Children have to be checked for height every few months. They have to check their bone density. Depending on when you start them, you have different combinations of possible complications. But here are a couple of, here's a sentence that it kind of speaks to me more than the others. It says, keep in mind that some of these changes, they're talking about changes from taking puberty blockers, are not reversible or will require surgery to reverse the effects. So to me, those are the things we're trying to not do to adolescent children. Let them get of age, and whatever they want to do when they're old enough, is up to them. It's their life. But when they're young and impressionable, I think parents should let them grow, and because they're going to change over time. Hormones will change naturally, and until you've matured, you don't know how you're going to feel about the other sex or the same sex. You may have feelings that come and go during that time. I don't know. But I think you should wait and see how things develop before you do something that you can't reverse or that you have to do surgery to reverse. With that, I'd yield the rest of my time to Senator Hansen.
Thank you, Senator Mosier. Senator Hansen, you have 59 seconds.
Okay, I'll do my best here. I was hoping to answer some of John Kavanaugh's questions when I got some clarification, but I at least wanted to run through how the rules and regulations will be promulgated. This is a question I got among both in support and opposition. So first, like we talk about, the Chief Medical Officer along with DHHS will have an agency rule drafting of the rules and regulations when they meet. That will then go to a 30-day public notice for all the shareholders to kind of get involved, people who want to have their opinion heard, and then they will have a hearing, and a public hearing where people can come and testify and give their opinion, what they think is how best these should be rules should be promulgated, how best some of this stuff should be used, and after the hearing, then it will go to the AG's office to see if it passes.
That's your time, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator DeBoer, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, as I'm sitting here, I'm reflecting on a number of different things. I have been all day. The first and foremost thing I will say is that I do not think this can be about sides. It just can't be about sides. It has to be about Nebraska and Nebraskans. Today, before I came here and before I heard anything anyone had to say this morning, I was reflecting on Exodus 7, verses 3 through 4. But I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and I will multiply my signs and wonders in the land of Egypt. When Pharaoh doesn't listen, I will lay my hand upon Egypt. I was thinking about that because it's one of the most troubling passages for me. God hardens Pharaoh's heart, and then when Pharaoh doesn't listen, there's punishment for Pharaoh. I don't have an answer for that one, but I will say that I know here in this chamber, our hearts are hardened. And that makes me scared. I then reflect on the fact that a third of the population of Europe was killed in the 30 Years' War, which was started and sustained primarily over the question of who gets to speak for God. And after 30 years of that, half the population of Germany being gone, everyone sort of decided they were tired of killing each other over that question. And that decision to stop killing each other over the question of who gets to speak for God was some of the main inspiration for John Locke and other philosophers who our founders borrowed from when creating this country, and why the separation of church and state, personal convictions, and government actions was so important to them. I see what's happening here and across the country, and I sometimes ask, is there an America left? I keep reflecting on that. Senator Blood says democracy is messy, and it's really been messy a lot lately. Democracy is messy. Pharaoh's heart is hardened. And I wonder if there's an America left. The wounds from this process, this bill, they're not going to go away quickly. Not for the people whose lives are affected, and not for any of us.
1 minute.
I guess my final plea is that for those of you who don't want to vote for this bill but feel compelled to because of other influences outside of this body, outside of yourself, I'll say vote how you want to have voted 20 years from now in the middle of the night when you reflect back on this day. If there's any time left, I'll yield it to Senator Wishart.
Senator Wishart, you have 30 seconds.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. 30 seconds is not easy to get out what I wanted to talk about. It's just hard to put into words what it has been to experience this session and this day. But when it ultimately comes down to it, I think that people have the right to their bodies. And I think that's a right that goes way beyond constitutional rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Wishart. Senator Von Gillern.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today in support of LB 574 and AM 1658. I'm determined when this session is over, I'm going to download the journal and see if I can do a word search and see how many times the word hate has been used this year. I find it tragically ironic that Senator Hunt shares an incredibly personal and private story with this body, with the state, with the world, and then shares it again and again and again in a completely self-serving manner. But when Senator Aguilar shares a similar story, and I note a personal family journey that was completely framed in love, he's attacked repeatedly by Senator Hunt. The double standard is embarrassing. So much for sharing the challenges in our lives and lifting one another up in our journeys. Way to go in marginalizing another person's story and in turn marginalizing that individual and his family. A family, Senator Hunt, that you would claim to embrace. Apparently, if it's not your story, it doesn't count. If Senator Hunt expects us to receive her story with love and compassion and kindness, as she has said, and as we should, then I call on her to be the first to demonstrate that love and compassion to this body and to her constituents and to the state. But no, we hear over and over and over again how much we hate people. I haven't heard the word hate used by any proponent of this legislation, either publicly or privately. Senator Hunt said that Senator Jacobson's wife's D&C was an abortion, again, marginalizing a tragic personal story of another individual who was brave enough to share their personal story. And again, another lie to fit the narrative. But to hell with them, it's not Senator Hunt's story, so it doesn't matter. Removal of fetal tissue after the baby has passed is not now nor ever has been an abortion. A successful abortion is defined as one where the baby dies, period. When 574 was first debated, there were two individuals in the building meeting with senators who had experienced transition but later realized they were not trans, they were gay. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh confronted me on the first floor that morning in a complete panic that we had met with them. She stated that they didn't belong here, that they were inciting possible violence and causing fear for those demonstrating here today. I responded that I was simply doing what I thought was right and what she and others have encouraged those of us horrible conservatives to do. I was listening to those who have had a different life experience than my own in an attempt to understand them. She was in a panic over this because the narrative of these individuals did not fit with her own. How narrow-minded. Yesterday, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh said, if you have an ectopic pregnancy, you should run to the doctor and get it taken care of. First of all, how completely insensitive of her to minimize anyone who's going through such a tragedy. Shame on you for using someone's personal crisis to move your political ball down the field. Secondly, it was a complete and bold-faced lie, as we've seen Senator Michaela Cavanaugh do all year long. Lie after lie after lie. AM 1658, page 1, line 13, declares specifically that ectopic pregnancies are excluded. She knows this, but she still spreads the lies. She went on to say that if your child's brain is floating around outside its body, you'd better get to the doctor right away and get it taken care of. Again, how completely and incredibly insensitive. I was nearly brought to tears last night thinking that somewhere in Nebraska there's a real person, a real mom, a real woman who just found out that indeed they have a child with a fetal anomaly and they're trying to figure out what to do about it. Senator Raybould read a letter today stating, if I have to face going to prison to do my job, then we'll leave the state. Again, lies, bald-faced lies. If you say something long enough, loud enough, some people will believe it. The consequences of violating this law would be the same as any physician were to perform an improper surgery or commit malpractice. Senator Day made a point to discuss the negative economic impact of this bill passing. Senator Day, I will never make this a conversation around economics. No matter how many businesses you bully into signing a petition or a letter, no matter how many conferences choose to go elsewhere, no matter how many doctors threaten to leave, I will never sacrifice the life of an unborn baby or a child for economics. Never. To the senators I just addressed, you are the epitome of what you claim to be fighting against. You use lies to promote your agenda, you bully people and organizations, and you hate others who don't believe as you do. I see Senator Hunt's up after me in the queue, and I'm sure I'll be her next victim. I only ask that she stick to the truth when she does so. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Hunt, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Von Gillen's got bars. I didn't say anything wrong, and I don't regret anything I've said. And let's see somebody legislate a bill that goes against one of your children and see how you act. I said what I said, and I'm right. I would like to yield my time to Senator Conrad.
Senator Conrad, you have 4 minutes and 35 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Hunt. Colleagues, I'm going to try and build the record as clearly as I can. So apologize, I don't normally read floor speeches, but I want to be precise. Because AM 1658 merges two separate bills, that happened about 3 days ago, colleagues. LB 574 and various components of LB 626 that was put forward without a bill introduction in the first 10 days, without a public hearing, in contravention of our rules. It is improper for the legislature to combine the bills as it violates the single subject law. Article 3, Section 14 requires no bill shall contain more than one subject, and, colleagues, and the subject shall be clearly expressed in the title. Look at LB 574. Adopt the Let Them Grow Act and the Preborn Child Protection Act and provide for discipline under the Uniform Credentialing Act. There are three distinct subjects in the measure in contravention of Article 3, Section 14. This measure has been brought forward in contravention of our rules and is also non-germane. It's critical to acknowledge what's happening here. A desired result, raw political power. And this isn't about name calling to other members in this chamber. This is about taking away fundamental parental rights. This is about a violation of due process and equal protection. These are values that we all hold dear as Americans and as Nebraskans. The measure before us in the amendment is not a compromise. It is a hastily considered restructuring of the original 574 and a 12-week do-over abortion ban since LB 626 failed. It makes a mockery of the recommendations suggested in good faith by the discussions arranged by the Speaker. It undermines parental rights. It inserts more uncertainty, vagueness, and fear because it abdicates our responsibility for policymaking to a political appointee who has already demonstrated their willingness to ignore medical expertise in order to pass a ban. Colleagues, I talked with you about the series of abortion abortion restrictions in the modern history of the Nebraska Legislature. Each and every one of those measures were brought forward according to our rules and our Constitution. None of them had an emergency clause on them to ensure all stakeholders had an opportunity to ensure thoughtful implementation. We do not need another round of debate to cure this defect. This amendment was adopted in contravention of our practice less than 3 days ago and will become law with an E-clause the day after it is signed by the governor. If one person does not vote for the measure with the E-clause, you can still vote for cloture. You can still vote for the underlying bill. It won't change a word of the policy you're putting forward. But I'm begging you to find one vote
1 minute.
on the E-clause to give all stakeholders an opportunity to implement the bill thoughtfully. Senator Kauf's provision already has a later implementation date. You will not be disturbing that in any way, shape, or form. By removing the E-clause, the measure will still pass, but it will be implemented in a thoughtful way, in pattern and practice with our past policy proclamations. Our rules give us this last-minute opportunity to get it right. You can still advance your conscience, and you can ensure a thoughtful implementation. It's a momentarily withholding of one vote to allow for the bill to move forward and thoughtful implementation. I'm asking you to dig deep and consider the practical realities, which are critical to our duty as legislators, to
That's your
ensure
time,
we do
Senator.
not ensnare stakeholders unnecessarily. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Frederickson, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, colleagues. I'm not under any illusion as to how today's going to go and where we are with all of this as a body. And I've been watching all of this today and thinking about the emotion that's both here in the chamber, but also obviously out in the rotunda and what was up in the balconies. And I spoke a little bit about this yesterday, and I think it's worth just kind of going back to again. And I'm not going to talk about how we feel about the bill or things like that, but what I do want to talk about is how we're making policy in here. And I spoke yesterday about how, the architects of bills like 574 and the transgender bills we're seeing across the entire country, they've come out talking about how they've done polling to see what can rile people up and get their base riled up. And I think everything we're seeing in here amongst ourselves, in the rotunda, this is underscoring and highlighting that is what's happening with this bill here. This is not a bill that is designed for good policy. It's a bill that's designed to capitalize on emotion. And I know I'm a freshman senator, so I don't have years and years of experience in this legislative body, but I don't think any of us can sit here and think that this is this is not normal. What's going on within the chamber, but outside of it as well. And I think that is really underscoring what's happened here. And again, I don't know where we go from here. I don't know where we go from here. But what I do hope we can do is take the lessons that we're learning from this. And I hope this can help us inform our policy making moving forward. With that, I'll yield any remaining time I have to Senator Duncan.
Senator Duncan, 1 minute, 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I do rise again in adamant opposition to LB 574 and in favor of AM 1474. So I just wanted to kind of shift the conversation briefly back to some of the things that Senator John Kavanaugh had started talking about earlier. I know he's up next, so he's going to continue this conversation. But one of the main problems with this bill that has not even been discussed yet, because this is a new amendment we just saw 4 days ago, is that it is in fact an unlawful and unconstitutional delegation of authority by the legislature to an elected official or to an appointed official.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. We know that the legislature can delegate authority in certain circumstances, right? That's something we do from time to time, but it's been very, very clear that limitations of power that we have to make sure that if we are giving authority to an administrative agency or to an elected official, it has to meet certain criteria. It must be clearly and definitely stated in the authorizing act what the parameters of that delegation are. The delegation cannot be indefinite, obscure, or vague, or based upon extrinsic evidence that's not readily available. Colleagues, that is exactly what's happening in this law. The CMO being delegated the authority to create rules and regulations pertaining how individuals access care is an absolute unlawful, unconstitutional delegation of our authority as a legislature. So we're going to get a little bit more into the details of that, but I want to make sure that when you think about this legislation, it's not just about whether you agree with the intent or not.
That's your time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Duncan. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, again, I rise in opposition to LB 574. And I did want to touch on my amendment, AM 1474. The reason I brought this amendment, so AM 1474 was the product of the conversations, negotiations we had, and addressed the concerns, or attempts to address the concerns of folks who are in favor of this bill. It does so in a specific, clear, direct way. It puts limitations on what type of care can be offered. It puts specific requirements. It has clarity, and it is definite, as opposed to the bill we're talking about here is vague. I talked to Senator Hansen. I appreciate him going to get those answers. I would ask, where in the bill are the answers that Senator Hansen just gave us? They're not there. This bill is unclear. The delegation of authority that Senator Duncan just talked about is indefinite. It's not specific. It's vague. There's no limit on that delegation of authority. This bill gives to the chief medical officer the ability to make rules on par with the ability to write laws. We are supplanting my amendment, or my amendment would supplant that delegation of authority to the chief medical officer. And what this bill does is puts the chief medical officer in the position of the legislature for making the regulations that my amendment makes. So it is an unlawful delegation of our authority. We don't put any limits on it. Additionally, this bill violates the single subject rule. As Senator Conrad talked about, I objected on germaneness on the last round. This bill takes up two distinct subjects, covers two distinct acts of our statute. It addresses care for transgender youth, and it separately addresses abortion care. Two completely different things. You go to two different doctors for that. And what we know from the negotiations, and we know from what people have said on the floor here, is that the reason the abortion part was added was because the transgender part could not pass without it. That's the reason. Not that they're of the same subject, not that they cover the same material, but because one could not pass without the other. And clearly the abortion bill couldn't pass without the trans bill because we had to bring it back to life, right? It's a zombie bill. So they are not of the same subject. They violate our constitutional prohibition on single subject, and one bill is being used to induce your vote for the other, which is one of the reasons we have the single subject rule, is so that when you vote for something, you vote for it and not the thing that it's attached to. We should not be inducing votes through this sort of combining unrelated subjects. So I did want to talk about the difference between my amendment and this amendment. My amendment puts out specific number of months that a person must be receiving care for their transgender, for gender incongruity, I think is the right word. 12 months, puts out a specific number of months that somebody must get care for that before they can pursue
1 minute
surgical option. My amendment puts specific requirements of 2 doctors have to agree to diagnose somebody before they can get care. Specific. We know how many doctors, we know what they have to get. My amendment includes the findings that they would have to find in compliance with medical practice to make that diagnosis. This bill is unclear. It does not tell us how long the waiting period is going to be. It does not tell us how many hours of therapy someone's going to have to go through. It does not tell us which medicines will be approved and by whom. And the answers we've received here are not within the bill. There's a lot of assumptions and guesses and presumptions in this bill. There are not facts, specific delegations. We do not know what's going to happen when this bill goes into effect, which is one of the reasons we should not have the E-clause. But we're rushing to this. This bill was introduced about a week and a half ago to make some pretty rapid. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. To those watching, you are loved. You matter. You are worth fighting for, and I will continue fighting for you. Mr. President, I yield my time to Senator George Dungan.
Senator Dungan, that's 4 minutes, 45 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. And colleagues, I'll try not to speed through this too much, but we have such a limited amount of time, and I truly want you to pay attention to this if you're listening at all, because this is not a rehashing of a conversation we've had before. This is unique to this amendment, which is just being debated now here today, essentially for the first time. As I was saying, this is an unlawful and unconstitutional delegation of authority to the chief medical officer. What we know is that in order for the delegation of authority to be valid and to be upheld by the courts, there has to be reasonable limitations on the authority that's been delegated. The courts have said that reasonable limitations and standards as to the delegation are necessary, or otherwise it's going to be unconstitutional. In digging deeper into what that actually means, they specifically have already found in prior overturning of delegation of authority that the delegation of the authority has to be limited, controlled, and to a determinable degree. So if you look at the fact that there's reasonable standards that have to be in place for that delegation, and then compare that to the delegation of authority that's being given the chief medical officer in 574 with this amendment, it simply doesn't hold up. And this is not a stretch. I'm not trying to just throw a wrench in the cogs here at the last minute to get people to go against this. If you specifically look at what Senator Kavanaugh was talking about earlier, the vague criteria that's outlined with regards to the chief medical officer, it specifically says on page 15, line 23, that the rules and regulations that they're being delegated the authority to promulgate have to include, at a minimum, the following. At a minimum, the following. And it goes on to list 3 subsections that those rules have to include. It doesn't give us any indication as to how they consider it, what evidence to look at, but it delegates them the unlimited authority to say, thou shalt create these rules, which have to, at a minimum, include these 3 things, but there is no ceiling to that. It is unlimited. So the rules and regulations they've been delegated the authority to promulgate do not have any kind of reasonable limitation whatsoever. Colleagues, that is an unconstitutional delegation of authority. Moreover, when they get into the things that the rules can consider with regards to the allowance of non-surgical gender-affirming care, and it says that they shall, at a minimum, page 16, line 3, set forth the following. And that gets into the vague things that Senator John Kavanaugh just talked about. But again, it's a minimum. So there's 4 things that they have to put into their rules and regulations there, but there is no limit on 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Go talk to clergy members, get a letter, jump through this hoop, do 1,000 hours of therapy. We don't know what those are. So the chief medical officer, by virtue of this amendment, is being delegated unlimited and unrestrained authority in setting those standards. And the courts have found over and over again that they have to be limited, controlled, and done to a determinable degree. The fact that there is no determinable degree on what those are is incredibly problematic. Moreover, colleagues, the fact that the CMO, the chief medical officer, is being given the authority of the legislature, and then DHHS, which is an agency, has to promulgate their own rules pursuant to whatever the chief medical officer comes up with, is also a problem. The fact that the rules that get come up with that are promulgated by DHHS cannot contradict and have to be in accordance with the rules of the chief medical officer essentially say that what this chief medical officer says goes, that becomes the law of the land. We've delegated that authority to the CMO. And then DHHS, based on what the CMO has come up with, can then make their own rules up. DHHS promulgates their own rules, but they have to be in congruence with and in accordance with, thank you, Mr. President, the rules of the chief medical officer, again, who is not an elected official, they're an appointed official. And so the very fact that there is not a single limitation on what can and can't be considered, there is no guidance in this with regards to best practices or what the chief medical officer needs to look at in order to make these determinations is not just problematic, colleagues, it is unconstitutional. We've had 4 days to look at this. We have not gotten a chance to look into it. I'm not trying to pull the wool over your eyes. Please look at the law, look at the fact that there is no limitation on the CMO whatsoever, and understand that that is an unlawful delegation of authority. I would also encourage my colleagues to continue to consider the emergency clause being removed. We haven't had enough time to look at this. We have to dig into it more. You can vote for cloture on this bill. We just need a little more time to figure out how to implement aspects of this that just got added into the bill this week. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Dungan. Senator Bostrom, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to speak from or read from an article out of On Science, issue 12, April 2, 2023. It's the 12 amazing facts about developing human beings at 12 weeks of gestation. I want to get back to kind of what the bill is talking about and what we're talking about here today. First thing is all of the major organs have formed. Almost every organ and tissue form by 12 weeks. The remainder of the pregnancy is spent growing these organs larger and more mature to prepare for life outside of the womb. By 10 weeks gestation, she will already have over 90% of the more than 44,500 named structures in the adult body, including arms, legs, fingers, toes, a face, and eyelids. The digestive system, skin, and muscles have all started to function. The fetus may still be small at 12 weeks, about 2.5 inches in length, weighing less than an ounce, but she is already an incredibly complex and multifaceted human being. Number 2, the 4-chambered heart pumps over 6 quarts of blood per day. The 4 chambers of the heart formed by the 8th gestation week. The heart reaches its final shape by 10 weeks. The heart is a vital source of circulation of nutrients and oxygen-carrying blood. The heart and circulation system of a 12-week-old fetus pumps an average of 6 quarts of blood per day, which is equivalent to 1.5 gallons of milk. For comparison, an adult heart pumps 6,000 quarts of blood per each day. Number 3, the heart has already beat over 10 million times. About 22 days after fertilization, 6 weeks of gestation, the heart starts to beat rhythmically. The average heart rate is at 12 weeks is 167 beats per minute. By then, the heart has already beat over 10 million times. Number 4, each finger moves separately, starting at 10.5 weeks gestation. Then something When something touches the fetus' hand, he starts to close his fingers. By 10 weeks, he will bring his hands together and touch his face. Typically, the fetus moves all of his fingers together except the thumb. Over the next few weeks, he starts to bend his fingers more deeply and move his thumb, as if he were grasping an object. By 12 weeks gestation, the fetus moves each finger separately and spontaneously, explores his environment with his fingers. Number 5, the fetus sucks his thumb, which is with a preference for his left or right hand. As early as 10 weeks gestation, it is possible to determine whether the unborn child is left-handed or right-handed by studying the ultrasound. Number 6, unique fingerprints are forming. Every human being has unique fingerprints which start forming during the 12th week of gestation. Number 7, the fetus has a face. By the 12th week of gestation, the fetus has a recognizable face with prominent face features including a forehead, nose, cheeks, jaw, tongue, upper and lower lips, eyes, and ears. 8, the fetus exhibits complex behaviors. By 12 weeks gestation, the fetus shows complex behaviors such as yawning, stretching, swallowing, scrunching hands into little fists, touching her face, and scratching her head. The fetus can now bend her elbows and bring her hands together, squint, grasp, and point her toes. She even makes intermittent breathing motions. Number 9, teeth are developing. Teeth start to develop as buds in the 9th week of gestation. Around 11 weeks of gestation, the buds of the permanent teeth start to develop underneath the baby teeth. Number 10, the body responds to touch and may experience pain. The touch receptors can be seen around the mouth and hands at 7 1/2 weeks of gestation, and the embryo starts to reflex and move away from at 8 weeks. Nerve synapses for spinal reflex are completely in place by 10 weeks. Pain receptors begin forming at 7 weeks gestation age, with the nerves linking pain receptors to pain sensing part of the brain. In conclusion, if one follows the science, it's clear that preborn children at 12 weeks gestation are already amazing, complex human beings. All of the major internal organs are formed and are already functioning, including the heart. They start forming brain connections, and this will last into adulthood. Are developing unique fingerprints and
That's
already
your time,
show.
Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Bostoman. Senator Blood, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Fellow Senator friends all, excuse me, I vote in support. Speak on support of the return to select file and against the underlying bill. And I have to say, Senator Kauth and others, I agree. You are absolutely right. The adults can make adults can make these decisions, and children cannot. You keep saying that, but then you take away the right to do so, and continue to either unknowingly or knowingly lie about how I can count on one hand how many children this bill actually affects in Nebraska every year. I have 5 fingers, friends. And by the way, Senator Merman, so much for your parental Bill of Rights. So again, because you've rushed this amendment and you've not had a 407 process, which we do for all scope of practice, and you suggest that this does not apply to IVF as you did the previous year's bill, but then you define preborn child as anything throughout the embryonic and fetal stages of development. IVF can't happen unless the embryo has been fertilized. So you have unknowingly, friends, yet again, taken IVF away based on the way this bill is written. And Senator Jacobson, who has wandered off, you and I are not doctors. Preborn is not a medical term and does not belong in law, period. Unborn is only a medical term at 11 weeks. So you can keep standing here and saying preborn and unborn, but it does not change the fact that you are willing to put those words into state statute. I have not stood here and called names. I have not stood here and threatened you. I have from the very beginning told you that this is a very defective bill and to please fix it. And you have not done so nor chosen to do so. With that, I would yield any time I have left to Senator Vargas.
Senator Vargas, you have 2 minutes, 42 seconds.
Thank you very much, Senator. Thank you, Senator Blood. As policymakers, we should not be limiting the expertise of doctors and nurses. I've been very, very clear with that. You've heard it from my colleagues. You've heard it on the mic. We cannot pick and choose when we listen to policy. We listen to associations on so many different levels to inform our policymaking. And we are disregarding 1,400 individuals in the healthcare profession right now. Second, we talk about consistently elevating experts, but what we're doing here, not elevating experts just in their field, we are delegating an unreasonable set of circumstances in this amendment. The significant authority to an unelected appointed individual, the chief medical officer, is something that I have not seen in my time. People debated whether or not during the pandemic we should be giving this type of power to unelected individuals, but here we're giving it carte blanche to the chief medical officer and disregarding all the other policymakers in the healthcare profession. We're setting different standards. This is not a small bill. These are two consistently separate ideas, one of which did not have a hearing, did not have people that were able to engage in it. It still has and lacks a significant amount of details on what powers are given to the chief medical officer. And if you've looked at any of the bills that we have worked on in years within healthcare, we have worked with associations, we have worked with appointed groups of individuals that help inform it. This does not do that. This gives it to the Board of Health and chief medical officer. I can't just say it's a tricky slope. It is a very dangerous slope to be going down this route. We've never done something like this. We shouldn't do something like this. It's the reason why we have been laying down the groundwork for the policy argument. I continue to stand against LB 574 because ultimately decisions about care for transgender youth and about maternal health and their bodies should be made by families, individuals, doctors, mental health professionals. These established medical practices are rooted in science and should be, and politicians have absolutely no place in this process. That's what this should be about. I'm hoping we have somebody that is brave enough to step up and change their vote. And that is also...
That's your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Vargas. Senator Holleran, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I agree with Senator Vargas. I hope he's brave enough to change his vote. I would like to challenge Senator Conrad's conclusion. She suggested that this bill, LB 574, as amended by 1658, is gender-based discrimination. For the record, LB 574 and AM 1658 is not gender-based discrimination. This is protecting both biological sexes. On another note, there's been some discussion on the part of Senator John Kavanaugh and Senator Dungan and Senator Danielle Conrad in regard to whether or not this violates the single subject rule. I find that a novel argument, since we have been through at least a week or better of dealing with what we affectionately call Christmas tree bills. More technically, they're omnibus bills, where bills are packaged together, many different subjects, arguably some of them not related to the other, and I saw no challenge on the part of Senator John Kavanaugh, Senator Danielle Conrad, or Senator Dungan on the single subject rule. They sat quiet. Now, all of a sudden, that's a constitutional issue that they're elevated to make an argument that this should not go through. Another note, the legislature in the past has passed dozens of bills over the decades, dozens of bills, and they have allowed the agencies that legislation pertain to promulgate the rules. Now suddenly this is a challengeable issue. So, not being a lawyer, I'm going to quit on those legal subjects, but I would give the balance of my time to Senator Steve Erdman. Senator Steve Erdman. Senator Steve Erdman.
Senator Erdman, you yielded 250.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Holleran. I had an idea suggested to me a couple of weeks ago by a good friend of mine about putting a memorial up for those babies that have been aborted since Roe v. Wade started 49 years ago. I think it's a great idea. We have a memorial for Vietnam people, for World War II, I, all of those. We have a marker for unknown soldier. Memorial Day is coming up. I think this is a great idea, and we can put an inscription on similar to this. This is to remember the unborn killed. We won't recognize them, for we never saw them. We won't be able to find them because their body parts have been scrambled like eggs. They didn't choose to be killed. Someone else made that choice for them. Governors never saved them. Legislators never protected them. The judges never listened to them. They were never loved by their mother or their father. Instead, they were considered inconvenient, suctioned into a tube, and discarded like refuse. Although they had hands and eyes and legs and arms and a heart, they were never considered persons worthy of a proper burial. I would commit the rest of my time to a moment of silence in those who have been killed.
Time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Halloran and Senator Erdman. Senator Hughes, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to repeat some things I've heard earlier from some of my colleagues. I also am so tired of hearing how much of a hater I am and all this about hating the LGBTQ community. The only people using the word hate the most is Senator Michaela Cavanaugh and Senator Megan Hunt. This is not an anti-trans bill. This is about kids. This is about waiting and slowing down before going down a path with permanent consequence. My biggest concern with this came when I spoke to Planned Parenthood one day that they called me out to the rotunda. Yes, because when people call me out, I actually go out and listen. Doesn't matter what side of the story they're on, I will listen. I was so surprised, why would Planned Parenthood be involved in gender-affirming care? To me, Planned Parenthood is about reproductive care, providing birth control, checking for STDs, etc. So let me just read what is on their website. And I printed it off. We offer transgender hormone therapy using an informed consent model. That means you do not need to participate in therapy or get a referral to receive your hormone therapy. We support our patients in making the decision that is best for them. Patients in Minnesota and Nebraska must be at least 16 years old and post-puberty to qualify for this service. And yes, they'll have to bring a parent or guardian, but they do not have to participate in therapy to get that. This is exactly why something needs to be done. You need to participate in therapy before a teenager can walk in and get growth hormones. Once you start down this road, you cannot go back. How can Planned Parenthood do this without therapy first? I just want to remind everyone what the current version of this bill does. It stops surgeries on minors for purposes to change their gender. It allows any youth currently taking growth hormones and puberty blockers to be able to continue. And it tasks the chief medical officer and HHS to develop standards before they go down this path. There needs to be a requirement for therapy before a child starts going down this path that results in a permanent outcome. We are not trying to prevent them from being who they are. We are simply saying they cannot have gender reassignment surgery before they're an adult, and that they follow some rules and regulations established in order to access hormones and puberty blockers before they are an adult. That is what this does. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Kauth, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Jana. That was really well said. LB 574 has come a long way. We've made changes. We've listened. We've adjusted. This bill is and always has been about protecting children. It does not discriminate based on sex. It protects children of both biological sexes. We are all apparently in agreement that a child's brain does not fully mature until their mid-20s. Because we're in Nebraska, the age of majority is 19, something my kids really were upset about when we moved here. Let Them Grow only addresses those children who are under the age of majority. This is not about adults. This is about kids. This is the only reason we need to protect children from experimental, irreversible medications and surgical procedures. Their brains have not yet fully developed. They don't have the capacity to understand. They don't have the life experience to realize that what they feel one day may not be the same the next. There have been quite a few senators who've commented that they hope to bring bills that protect children in the future. And they expect anyone who supports the Let Them Grow bill to support their bills. If you're not voting for LB 574, you're making a statement that you believe children are able to make these kinds of decisions as children. You're saying that you believe a child's brain is fully developed, and so when it comes to issues like crime or other decisions that they might make, where we would ordinarily say, okay, they were a teenager, they weren't capable of making a decision. By not voting for this bill, you're saying you think that every child is capable of an adult decision. I will find it very difficult looking at bills going forward to trust the motivations of someone who uses that argument if they are not voting for this bill. The very loud vocal opposition, some of whom have come from out of state to protest in the rotunda, would have you believe that they are the majority of Nebraskans. They are not. The truth is, we all get emails, phone calls, and cards saying thank you. Please get this passed. Help protect our kids. I have doctors, psychiatrists, therapists, teachers, parents, transgender adults, and quite a few teenagers who have reached out to me and have agreed that kids should not be able to decide to use experimental, irreversible medications and surgeries to treat gender dysphoria. And yes, some of those teens have been dealing with gender dysphoria themselves. The teens that I corresponded with were fascinating. They all talked about how they have made decisions as teenagers, and they're like 17 or 18 now, and they're talking about when they were 13 or 14 and going, wow, that was dumb. I shouldn't have done that. And they've said, you know what, we're glad that we're not held to the same standard of responsibility, and they got it. If kids can understand that and look and say, okay, yeah, maybe we're not ready for it, again, the adults in the room need to be putting these guidelines in place. I love what Senator Brad Von Gillern said about this is not an economic argument. We've had lots and lots of talk about North Carolina. I'd like to point out that when North Carolina did pass their bill, they did lose about $3 billion over the course of 6 years. However, their economy grew to over $500 billion. This year, they are putting forth 6 gender-related bills in their legislature.
1 minute.
Clearly, thank you, Mr. President, correlation is not causation. The states with the most progressive policies have seen the greatest loss of citizens. If you look at California, they ran out of U-Hauls trying to get out of the state. Can we say that's because of their progressive liberal policies about gender? No, there's a lot of other factors. Associating this one bill with every bad thing that could possibly happen in Nebraska, whether it's people leaving, businesses not coming here, there's no data to support that. Correlation does not equal causation. I believe that we have a strong state. We have a great economy. We have people who care deeply, as you can see by all of the engagement in this bill. We're lowering our taxes. We're doing the things we need to make ourselves more attractive to businesses and to keep people here.
That's your time.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kauth. Senator Clemens, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support again for LB 574. I'd like to read a message I received from a Nebraska professional counselor, their opinion of gender transition procedures on minors. It's unthinkable to me as a licensed medical health professional and parent that we live in a time when people refer to the chemical sterilization of children as health care. The science is clear. Children do not have a fully developed frontal lobe. The frontal lobe of the brain provides human beings the ability to fully ascertain how their actions will impact them and others. It is not developed until the age of 25. To be honest, this bill doesn't go far enough. No person should be able to mutilate themselves chemically or physically until they are mature enough to understand the long-term effects. You don't have to look far to see the devastation in the lives of detransitioners, all because of this great lie being perpetuated on this generation. Medical professionals say puberty blocker treatments are fully reversible. Where are the studies? There are no long-term studies. These young people deserve compassionate care to help them address the root cause of their distress when it relates to their biological sex. No other mental health diagnosis is treated with the affirmation-only model. We don't affirm someone's suicidal ideation. We treat them maladaptive thinking patterns. I'm ashamed of my profession for perpetuating gender ideology at the expense of children. None of this should surprise us when considering that the same people who promote this destruction are completely fine with snuffing out human life in the womb for the purpose of convenience. Let them grow. A professional counselor from Nebraska, name withheld by me for their security. I yield the rest of my time to Senator Ben Hansen.
Senator Hansen, that's 2 minutes and 43 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. And so I kind of want to continue a little bit on but how I was discussing how the rules and regulations kind of get promulgated, like what the process is. And this is actually under the Nebraska Administrative Procedure Act. This can actually be found on the Secretary of State's website. This has to do with the drafting, and I think this is one of the questions Senator John Kavanaugh had, the amending and the repealing of rules and regulations. So again, first we have agency rule drafting from the Chief Medical Officer, DHHS, and then it has a 30-day public notice, and like I said, it has a hearing to hear from the medical profession, some of us, the public, and then it will go to the AG's office. We'll kind of go under scrutiny on whether it follows what we have in statute on the certain things that we would like them to address. Make sure it doesn't go against anything that we have put in statute. If it doesn't, or if he doesn't think the language is right, they send it back and they work on it some more. After it goes to the AG's scrutiny, then it goes on to the governor and PRO, and once he signs it, it becomes law 5 days after. And from there, it'll go to the Secretary of State's office where it gets published. So that's kind of the whole, so it's not like the chief medical officer just decides what the rules are and that's what's going to happen. It has to go through this scrutiny in all of these levels of procedure in order to actually become law, the new rules and regs. And if they need to amend it, they have to go through the whole same thing again. So it's quite the kind of ordeal in order to do some of the drafting of these rules and regulations. And I did want to touch on just briefly the E clause that some of us have been talking about. The E clause that we do have on the bill actually does pertain to the whole bill. However, very similar to what we do with our budget, we have in statute, of course, on page 7 of my copy, line 17, beginning October 1st, 2023, performing gender-altering procedures for an individual younger than 19 years of age is a violation of Section 17 of this Act. So actually, the E clause pertains to the bill, but it actually doesn't get it doesn't actually start until October 1st of 2023 before it actually becomes a violation. And I think that's to kind of give this process time to evolve, to go to promulgate the rules and regulations instead of just starting right away. And so we will have some time in between the passage of this bill and October 1st to get some of those rules and regulations in place. So I just want to clarify at least that part, and I think Senator Kavanaugh was alluding to that, and that's one of the questions that he asked me as well. So with that, I'll yield. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Senator Aguilar, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in full support of LB 574E. And I think I pretty much had said my piece yesterday, so I'm going to yield my time to Senator Linehan.
Senator Linehan, you have 4 minutes and 43 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Aguilar. I'm going to read, because I was actually shocked when I read this stuff this morning. I'm going to read from Planned Parenthood's site that's on the web for any teenager to click on. We use the informed consent model. We offer transgender hormone therapy using an informed consent model. That means you need not to participate in any therapy or get a referral to receive your hormone therapy. We support our patients in making a decision that is best for them. Patients in Iowa and South Dakota must be at least 18 years old to qualify for this service. Patients in Minnesota and Nebraska must be at least 16. I don't think I was allowed to date before I was 16. 16 years old. You need to bring a parent or guardian for your first visit. What will happen on your first visit? We'll review your medical history, review our informed consent form with you, measure your weight and blood pressure, discuss your transition goals, and create a care plan for you, draw a lab test, and explain how to take hormones, and answer any questions you might have. So, it's true. They hand out hormones to kids who are 16 years old without any therapy. It's nuts. I'll yield the rest of my time to Senator McDonald.
Senator McDonald, you have 2 minutes, 52 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Linehan. I want to thank Senator Koth for bringing this legislation and working with me and others and having good discussions. Also, I want to thank the senators that are opposing this legislation, but that have conducted themselves professionally, diplomatically, maturely during this process. Also, the people from our state that have taken the time, again, to address this issue and disagree with it, but do it in a mature way, in a professional way, because it was helpful. We have a responsibility to the people that elect us. We also have a responsibility to this institution. This institution is bigger than us. We should take the problem serious. We should take the solution serious, but we shouldn't take ourselves that seriously. This isn't easy. It wasn't supposed to be easy. But every one of us decided to run, and they call this the people's house, and it is, but it's also the people's time. We had 820 bills introduced this year. Those bills are important. They're important to the senator that introduced them. They're important to the people that came and testified on them, the people that came up with the ideas, the staff that worked on them. And I don't think we've done justice as senators, my 7th year here, making sure that we do our jobs, again, to those senators that disagree with this legislation and that have done it professionally and politely, maturely, diplomatically. I thank them because that's part of the process. But for all of us going forward, we have to realize we're not representing ourselves. We're representing the state of Nebraska and the people that live here and that are counting on us. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator McDonald. Senator Holcroft, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to read a transcript from the Rosie Did You Nosy program from May 15, 2023. This was presented by Jim Rose on KFAB and was entitled Impressionable Children and Gender Dysphoria. Please meet Chloe Cole, and I encourage you to look her up on the web. She has a great story to tell. She is almost now 18. At 11, as is most every 11-year-old, she was confused and she spent too much time on social media. One day, she read an Instagram post from an LGBTQ website. It welcomed the impressionable Chloe in with questions that she'd been asking herself, so she clicked it on. Suddenly, an algorithm targeted Chloe. Every day, more and more information about gender dysphoria came to Chloe. It made it sound very normal. Pretty soon, she was getting messaged by others, unclear who and what they were, other kids, maybe bots, even adults. But they left Chloe with the impression there were lots of Chloes. Girls who think they may very well be boys. So she told her parents and teachers. They listened, then acted. Turned her questions into confirmation. Began administering puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones to turn her into a boy. She changed her name to Leo. By age 15, she'd undergone a radical double mastectomy. Her breasts were gone forever. But modern chemicals, poisons, and surgery can't beat the brain and the heart. Even at 15, Chloe knew something was terribly wrong. So she stood up for herself and stopped what she could. Today, now almost 18, is certain she's a woman. Each day, she must valiantly try to reverse these chemicals' results, but must live with the promise she is at the highest risk for cervical cancer now. And because of the surgery, she must live with the permanent consequences of the action taken by the adults in her life. Infertility is virtually guaranteed. Chloe Cole is at the heart of Nebraska's Legislative Bill 574, to be debated and voted one final time, likely this week. Lost in this emotional narrative about transgenderism, sexual dysfunction, discrimination, intolerance, even economic sabotage, is an appalling lack of time spent on facts. We are told by the loudest voices, parroted almost universally by the Nebraska news media, implying and inferring these blockers and hormone treatments are safe. We don't know that. Dr. Michael Laidlaw, a respected endocrinologist in California, a leader in his field, has gone public with the facts. There has been very little research done in this area of modern medicine, no controlled studies. There is no test for gender, no blood test, MRI, genetic testing. The advocates are small groups of very few people who lodge theories that somehow turn into best practices. We do know this. These chemical treatments affect a small part of the brain that is called the pituitary gland, which controls your sex organs. Once artificially stopped, this natural process of boys to men and girls to women, only harmful things happen. Hormone blockers reduce bone density, which for the rest of your life makes you vulnerable to orthopedic maladies. Suicide rates is the most reverberated argument favoring gender reassignment freedoms. Claims rates are spiking among gender-confused children. There are no credible statistics to back that up. For decades, we have studied teen suicide. That data is clear. Bullying, coupled with difficult at-home life and isolation, most drives teenagers to kill themselves.
1 minute.
Gender dysphoria is only a factor. If that child also suffers from an uncaring family, is bullied, and has no support networks. The conclusion is don't change a suicidal child's sex. Get them therapy. Now from where has all of this come? Social influence. If 99% of us easily identify as either a male or female, why are children flooded with messages saying you might not be what you are or are not? Certainly not science. Propaganda. It's become a social contagion in today's culture of isolation. Kids react to what they see and read on social media. They join chat rooms to belong and then get coached. We know you're confused and here's how you can fix it. Parents are duped. They buy into it out of a desire to make their child happy. According to the Hastings report.
It's your time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Holcroft. Senator Dungan, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you. Colleagues, we're getting down here to the wire, and I just want to make sure that I highlight a couple of other points before we go forward on a vote with this. First of all, the conversation we've been having with regards to this delegation of authority, again, it's very important folks think about that before moving forward. I understand that Senator Hansen got up and kind of explained what he believes the process would be hypothetically if this were going through DHHS, but at the end of the day, the bill is silent as to the process and procedure that would be followed in order for these rules to be promulgated. What I know is that based on the case law that has been reviewed, the case law from Nebraska, where they have multiple times found delegations of authority to be improper, it is almost always when it is vague, when there is no limit on time, when it's indefinite, when it's unclear, when it's indeterminate, when it's obscure, and when there's not reasonable limitations. That all applies in this case, colleagues. We don't have, in this case, any particular barriers to prevent the CMO from promulgating rules, essentially law, dictating what can and can't be done in order to receive treatment, and that is an improper delegation of authority. We've had this amendment for 4 days, I believe, and so again, I would reiterate the point that's been made multiple times. You can vote for this bill, colleagues, and still vote to have the E clause or the emergency clause removed. If this bill passes, the second this is signed, abortion will be illegal the next day. Now, if that's your goal, again, we can disagree, but hospitals have been reaching out to us all day. I know they've talked to you all. Hospitals, doctors, the people who represent those hospitals, doctors, folks who understand that if this goes into effect immediately, it's going to be a huge problem. And so, colleagues, it is possible that you can vote for cloture on this, but not vote for the bill with the E clause. And so I just want to make sure I reiterate that again. And this is not something I'm trying to pull the wool over your eyes about. I'm not trying to dupe you. But please understand that if this goes into effect immediately, we are being contacted right now by doctors and folks who represent the doctors saying what a problem that's going to be. I know this has been an arduous process for a lot of people in here, but it should be. This should be hard. We're sent here to do hard work, and we're sent here to make big decisions, and there's nothing that we should take lighter than having the government infringe upon individual rights. And it's something that absolutely is happening in this circumstance. I said it yesterday, I said it before, I'll continue to say it. This is one of the largest infringements on personal rights that we are going to see this entire session. It is the government getting between doctors and patients. And it is hard, I know, for people to hear what's going on out in the rotunda, but again, it should be. I've sat across from kids who have told me that they're scared. I've sat across from parents who have told me that they're scared. I've talked to children, actual children. I don't know if any of you have sat down and talked to children, but kids who have looked me in the eye and said that this makes them feel like they're hated. This makes them feel like they are not welcome. It makes them feel like they're not allowed to be who they are. Colleagues, we should not be in the business of telling people what they can and can't do with their bodies. And we should not be in the business of stepping between doctors and patients in circumstances like this. This will not stop here. This is not the end of the road. If this passes, this is opening the door to so many things, taking rights away from trans folks in our community who are ostracized, who are treated different. Do you think people would choose to be in a community that folks like you are saying are wrong? No, they're not making that choice at all. They're being themselves, and they're being told by this legislature that they cannot be themselves. Colleagues, this law is discriminatory on its face. It's discriminatory insofar as it violates the Due Process Clause. It's discriminatory insofar as it violates the Equal Protection Clause. It's discriminatory in so many ways. On its face, it says transgender kids are different because these medications can be used for cisgender kids and they can't be used for transgender kids. This law is discriminatory. We should not be in the business of telling people what to do with their bodies. And colleagues, I'm asking you to dig deep and make a hard choice. I understand this is going to be an incredibly hard decision for a lot of you, but Harvey Milk said one time, it takes no compromise to give people their rights. It takes no money to respect the individual. It takes no political deal to give people freedom, and it takes no survey to remove repression. It doesn't take anything to let people live and let people make decisions about their own bodies. And that's all I'm asking you to do today, colleagues, is let people live and trust people to make the right decisions for themselves. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Dungan. Senator Kavanaugh, please state your point of inquiry.
I believe that we had a inappropriate yielding of time on yielded time. Could you just clarify for the record?
The correct rule would be that members speaking from the queue are allowed to yield their time to a second senator, but that second senator is not allowed to yield that time to a third senator during that speaking opportunity.
Thank you for the clarification.
You're welcome, Senator. Mr. Clerk, you have a motion on your desk.
I do, Mr. President. Senator Cowth would move to invoke cloture on LB 574 pursuant to Rule 7, Section 10.
Senators, please find your seat. We are on final reading. Senator Cowth, for what purpose do you rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to vote cloture on LB 574.
Senators.
Roll call vote. Regular order, please.
Thank you. Senators, the first vote is on the motion to invoke cloture. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Request for a roll call vote. Mr. Clerk.
Senator Aguilar. Voting yes. Senator Albright. Voting yes. Senator Arch. Voting yes. Senator Armendariz. Voting yes. Senator Ballard. Voting yes. Senator Blood. Not voting. Senator Boston. Voting yes. Senator Bostar. Voting no. Senator Bostelman. Voting yes. Senator Brandt. Voting yes. Senator Brewer. Voting yes. Senator Breezy. Voting yes. Senator John Kavanaugh. Voting no. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh. Voting no. Senator Clements. Voting yes. Senator Conrad. Voting no. Senator Day. Voting no. Senator DeBoer. Voting no. Senator DeKay. Voting yes. Senator Dorn. Voting yes. Senator Dover. Voting yes. Senator Dungan. Voting no. Senator Erdman. Voting yes. Senator Frederickson. Voting no. Senator Holleran. Voting yes. Senator Hansen. Voting yes. Senator Hardin. Voting yes. Senator Holdcroft. Voting yes. Senator Hughes. Voting yes. Senator Hunt. Voting no. Senator Ibaugh. Voting yes. Senator Jacobson. Voting yes. Senator Cowth. Voting yes. Senator Linehan. Voting yes. Senator Lippincott. Voting yes. Senator Lowe. Voting yes. Senator McDonnell. Voting yes. Senator McKinney. Voting no, Senator Mosier. Voting yes, Senator Merman. Voting yes, Senator Raybold. Voting no, Senator Riepe. Voting yes, Senator Sanders. Voting yes, Senator Slama. Voting yes, Senator Vargas. Voting no, Senator Von Gillern. Voting yes, Senator Walls. Voting no, Senator Wayne. Senator Wishart. Voting no, Senator Blood. Voting no. Vote is 33 ayes, 15 nays to invoke cloture, Mr. President.
Cloture is invoked. Members, the next question is the question to return to select file. All those in favor, vote aye. All those opposed, vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
13 ayes, 33 nays on the motion to return to select file, Mr. President.
The motion is not adopted. The next vote is to dispense with the at-large reading. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
34 ayes, 7 nays, dispense with the at-large reading, Mr. President.
The at-large reading is dispensed with. Mr. Clerk, please read the title.
Re-engrossed Legislative Bill 574, introduced by Cal 31, Aguilar 35, Albright 17, Bostelman 23, Brewer 43, Clements 2, Decay 40, Dorn 30, Dover 19, Erdman 47, Holleran 33, Hardin 48, Holcroft 36, Hughes 24, Ibaugh 44, Jacobson 42, Linehan 39, Lippincott 34, Lowe 37, McDonald 5, Merman 38, Sanders 45, Von Gillern 4, Slama 1, Ben Hansen 16. Bill for an act relating to public health and welfare to amend sections 38192, 38193, and 38196, reissue revised statutes in Nebraska in sections 38178, 38179, 38 2021, and 382894, revised statutes cumulative supplement 2022, to adopt the Preborn Child Protection Act and the Let Them Grow Act, to provide for discipline under the Uniform Credentialing Act, to harmonize provisions, to provide an operative date, to provide severability, to repeal the original sections and declare an emergency.
All provisions of law relative to procedure having been complied with, the question is, shall LB 574 pass with the emergency clause? All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Mr. Clerk.
Voting aye, Senators Aguilar, Albright, Arch, Armendariz, Ballard, Bostelman, Brandt, Brewer, Breezy, Clements, Decay, Dorn, Dover, Erdman, Holleran, Hansen, Hardin, Holcroft, Hughes, Ibaugh, Jacobson, Kauth, Linehan, Lippincott, Lowe, McDonald, Mosier, Merman, Riepe, Sanders, Slama, Von Gillern. Voting no, Senators Blood, Bostar, John Kavanaugh, Michaela Kavanaugh, Conrad, Day, DeBoer, Dungan, Frederickson, Hunt, McKinney, Raybold, Vargas, Walls, Wishart. Not voting, Senator Wayne. Vote is 33 ayes, 15 nays, 1 excused, not voting, Mr. President.
LB 574 passes with the emergency clause. While the legislature is in session and capable of transacting business, I propose to sign and do hereby sign Legislative Bill 574 with the emergency clause.